But then there's all these others, and they all have different properties. For example, we've got strontium-90 goes to the bones, and they cause bone cancer. We've got cesium-137, which goes to the muscle tissue, because each one of them has their own pathways through the environment and their own pathways in the human body, and that's where they do their damage. Next. Now, here's a gentleman who, this is an ad from the nuclear industry, and it's called Small Wonder. And he's holding up one of these little uranium pellets, and he's saying how amazing it is that this pellet produces so much energy. And truly, that is amazing. That's the real attraction of nuclear power, is the concentration of energy. And that's why people are obviously interested in saying, wow, you can pack that much energy into such a small thing. But what he doesn't tell you is that if that pellet, that's called a fuel pellet, and those pellets are inserted in these things which are called fuel bundles. Now, if that fuel pellet had been irradiated in a nuclear reactor, this man would be dead. Because although these bundles can be handled safely outside the reactor, as long as you wear gloves and don't stay around too long, they can be handled with very low radiation exposures. But once it comes out of the reactor, it's one of the deadliest objects on Earth, probably the deadliest object on Earth, because it will kill a man or a human being in 20 seconds at a distance of 1 meter without protection. When it comes out of the reactor, it looks exactly the same, but now it's full of those fission products, and the blast of radiation from it is absolutely incredible. So it will never again be handled by human hands. It will only be handled by robotic equipment. Next. Next. Oh yeah, sorry. Now, the idea of a reactor is it's another way to boil water. So what they do is, originally, they had another purpose for reactors. When the first reactors were built, they had another purpose, which is to produce a substance called plutonium. That's what the first reactors were built for. But they realized that since they're producing plutonium, there's a lot of waste heat that's produced. So they said, can't we make use of the waste heat? Cogeneration. Cogeneration. We can produce plutonium and heat. And so what can we do with heat? Well, we can boil water. And so that's what they do. They have a lot of water that goes around and gets very, very hot. It goes to a boiler, produces steam. That steam spins a turbine and generates electricity. It's exactly the same in that regard as a coal-fired plant or an oil-fired plant or a wood chip burning plant, any thermal plant. The only difference is how it produces the electricity. Next. Now this is the face of a Candur reactor. That man standing there, actually this is one of the Darlington reactors before it started up. If this reactor had started up, even for a relatively short period of time, that man would not be able to stand there, he'd be dead because of the radiation again. So once the reactor has started up, it becomes intensely radioactive. Now here's something a lot of people don't understand. This is about the safety question. The safety question is primarily based upon the fact that you can shut a reactor off within 2 seconds by automatic safety devices. There are devices which shut the reactor off, and that means the fission reaction stops completely. No more fissioning of uranium atoms. But nobody knows how to shut off the radioactivity. So the radioactivity continues. Nobody knows how to slow it down, speed it up, shut it off, or whatever. And the radioactivity alone generates heat, which is equivalent to 7% of full power heat. Now that's an enormous amount of heat, and it's more than enough to melt the core of the reactor at a temperature of over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, even if the reactor is completely shut down. So people don't understand this idea that just because you have shutdown systems, this does not mean the plant is safe. Because after the plant is shut down, it still has to be forcibly cooled in order to prevent the core from melting spontaneously. And that's what a meltdown is. A meltdown, what happened at 3 Mile Island, for example, in 1979, is there was 2 valves that caused the accident. There was one valve that had been shut off by a worker, and they forgot to open it again when they started it up. Now, normally that valve wouldn't have been important, but it turned out that a pump failed. One of the pumps failed. As soon as the pump failed, that valve, if that valve had not been closed, there were 3 other pumps that would have taken the place of the one that was shut down. The one that failed, right? And there wouldn't have been a problem at all. But because the valve was closed, none of the water from those 3 pumps got to where they were supposed to go, which is to the boiler. So the boiler boiled dry. And of course, that means that the pressure in the primary loop started increasing. Now, immediately the reactor was shut down. Within 2 seconds it was shut down. But the heat had to be removed anyway. And for the next 2 days, well, in 8 minutes they discovered the valve was shut down, they opened it up, and everything should have gone back to normal. But what they didn't know, and they didn't discover for 2 days, was that there was another valve inside the reactor which had opened to relieve the pressure. And because it was inside the reactor, nobody could go in there to look at it. The radiation was too intense. And because that valve was stuck open, it didn't close the way it was supposed to. And so for the next 2 days, they were losing water to the core of the reactor. And that's why the reactor started to melt down. By the time they discovered their mistake and managed to correct the situation, the core had already melted by about a quarter of it had already melted. If they had let it go for a few more hours, it would have gone all the way. So when people tell you that our safety systems work and that they solved this problem, it's not quite that simple. Next. Now I think I'll just, these are just some people who suffered the consequences of cleanups after nuclear accidents. This is a man named Barney Paulson who cleaned up. He was one of 600 military men who were ordered to go to Chalk River to clean up after one of the 2 accidents they had there in the 1950s. This one was in 1958. In fact, it was the same reactor, the NRU reactor, that Linda Keane was fired over. You know, Linda Keane, remember they were producing isotopes, and Linda Keane was the head of the Nuclear Safety Commission. She was fired by the Prime Minister, who now is re-elected, and but she's not reinstated. Anyway, that's the same reactor. That it was only shortly after startup that this accident happened. Next, we have Joyce Karate. This is a woman at 3 Mile Island who's expressing her opinion about a plan to decontaminate the reactor building, which was full of radioactive gases, by letting it out in little puffs into the atmosphere. And she thought that was not such a good idea. They could have instead frozen these gases, cryogenically frozen them, and shipped them off-site, but that would have been much more expensive. So they went ahead, but they carried out their plan, and afterwards a court ruled that they had broken the law in doing so. Next. And these are radioactive reindeer carcasses from northern Sweden. This is in Lapland, Sweden. These are reindeer carcasses which were harvested in the normal way by the, they herd reindeer in Lapland. And they slaughtered these animals in the normal way, but these carcasses are too radioactive for human consumption. If you go on the internet, you will discover that there are many farms in northern England and northern Wales today which cannot sell their sheep meat because of too much radioactivity. It's cesium-137 from the Chernobyl accident, which happened more than 20 years ago, thousands of kilometers away. But they still now cannot sell their sheep meat, some of those farms. They're under constant monitoring to make sure that everything... Gradually, things will get to a level where they'll say, well, that's good enough, now we can sell it. Okay, next. So the financial fallout of the safety problem, many people don't appreciate that there's financial fallout to every aspect of the nuclear industry. The fact that these accidents are possible and catastrophic in nature, in the States they had a report published by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission which said that the damages from a nuclear accident, a meltdown, could be as high as $600 billion from one accident, as well as hundreds of thousands of deaths. Because of this, no insurance company in the world will provide insurance for off-site damage from a nuclear accident. If you go home and read your insurance policy, you'll find that it has a clause in it saying you are not covered in the event of radioactive contamination. And it's precisely because of this reason. So that because no insurance companies will cover the off-site damages, there's a special act of parliament needed to provide compensation. And in fact, just last year I was testifying because now they want to offer complete protection after $650 million of damages. The owner of the plant is no longer liable for any other damages. That's about 0.1% of the expected damages that could occur. So that's something interesting. It's the only industry that requires a special act of Parliament to protect it from liability. And it's the only industry that no insurance company will insure worldwide. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the only industry in which private investors don't seem willing to invest. That's why when we sold a reactor to China, we couldn't get the banks to put up the money. We had to take it out of the treasury. We had to give China a loan of $2 billion out of our own treasury. And that was because private capital doesn't want to touch it.